Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of the Hindy Project podcast. Today I'm joined with Mohammed Hashim, who's a longtime friend of mine, very engaged in the Muslim community. We had an interesting conversation. It starts off a little bit of on a weird foot because I think both of us have a lot of conversations on my couch at home, but this is the first time doing it with microphones in our faces. But eventually it gets to a very interesting place, and there's some really interesting revelations that Mohammed shares with us about some recent news, and I hope you guys are going to enjoy it. Thanks. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So usually, and so far on this podcast, we've tried to showcase different imams and sheikhs and people who are in the da'wah, and just sitting down with them and having these casual conversations and getting to know them better. Today, we're having a full-fledged Muslim activist on the podcast, and him and I actually go way, way, way back. I have with me Mohammed Hashim.
Too long.
Too long. Actually, I was thinking, you might be one of the longer term friends I've ever had, which is interesting. But anyways, that's a different conversation to have.
I've enjoyed being paid by you to be your friend. Thank you.
So I think this is going to be a good conversation because I think some of the people who are going to be listening to this podcast are, quote unquote Muslim activists and in that sphere. And so I'm happy that I can introduce them to different Muslim scholars at a more personal level who might not be that exposed to the Islamic da'wah scene. And then I think some people are listening to this podcast who are deep into the Islamic da'wah scene and don't really know anything about Muslim activists and being involved in political advocacy and civic engagement.
What do you mean by Muslim activists?
I think just people who are involved in...
Who are Muslims who are activists? Or
who are active on files like Islamophobia, who are engaged in civic engagement, political engagement, kind of outside facing, versus those who are inside facing and are dealing with the Muslim community directly, its internal issues.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I kind of I've always been an activist type. I've been an organizer since about 2001, and I was always around Muslims to certain degrees, depending on how Muslim I was feeling at the time, and although I was around Muslims, Islamophobia was never really something I really cared much about until the lead up of 2015's federal election. And that's where I was just I've been organizing in political spaces on the left, doing progressive politics, doing union work, doing work for student unions and just doing community mobilizing and political work. And then in 2015 is where I was like, okay, you know what? This Harper guy is really annoying me. He's getting on my nerves. I got to really just start organizing within the Muslim community, build some voice, and figure out ways that we can bring new people in, expand the conversation, have that conversation take foot, and just start creating some political momentum around, pushing back against, some of the hate that was coming at us from that bigoted prime minister that we had, named Stephen Harper.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you get into activism? Because I know some of your high school friends, and the way they describe you is less than flattering.
You ain't going down there, man.
We're not going to go down that path, not exposing either of ourselves to that extent.
This is not a confessionary.
But what?
Oh, Imam, I have sinned.
Definitely not doing that.
Get me out.
But what was it that took you into activism to begin with? I know you worked for MAD for a while, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and all of that.
I think, back in the early 2000s when I was really starting to find my voice. It was a time when the anti-globalization movement was really was pumping, and there was a ton of conversation around global inequities and free trade and fair trade, and how there was just so much inequality in the world. and that narrative really spoke to me, and I found friends and comrades and people who I really connected with at that time around just doing activist work. So I kind of got like the bug bit in me. I'd say just maybe about a year before 9/11. And that's when I really started getting into just progressive politics as a whole. And since then, I've just kind of, I never knew that this was going to turn into a career. I just kind of felt like at the time I had something interesting to do, and I didn't really want to pay attention to school much. So this was something for me to do at university that took some time away.
Do you ever think like in different circumstances you would have been like
An engineer?
I was gonna say like a conservative politician, quote unquote activist, something like that?
Nah, man, I can't be that heartless.
Like, do you think you're more just like into the organizing, and then you just kind of ended up in like progressive organizing?
No, it was the other way around. Progressive politics spoke to me first, and then I was really influenced by people like Noam Chomsky, Rage Against the Machine, Naomi Klein, and thinkers around that time, and and I've seen Fidel Castro speak. I've seen people from across the spectrum on the left speak, and I think that like that narrative really got me into it. And then once I saw, there's a moment when every person who gets involved in political organizing understands their own power. And it's either it's either organizing something, creating a demand, and that demand is met, or they've created a thrust towards something, and that's led to a victory. And early on in my organizing, we had done this, February 6th Day of Action for the Canadian Federation of Students back in 2001, and no one thought it was going to work out. Because UTM was just at the time, U of T Mississauga was just run by a bunch of conservatives, really, and not really conservatives, but like apoliticos. And I was running a student club with a bunch of my friends, and we're like, hey, well, if they're not going to do, the student union's not going to do it, why don't we do it? So we did it, and we organized it, and it was like one of the the better organizations or organizing projects that was happening there. And it just kind of made me realize, like, wow, getting people out, it's not that hard. Speaking truth takes effort, but having people understand what that is takes even more effort. But when you realize that you can actually do something, and you felt like either taking power or you felt a bit of power, you're like, let's use this, let's figure out how to do this more and better and more effectively, and get surgical at it as you grow older and older.
Right. When did you start feeling, I mean, I guess you kind of talked about it, like, basically Harper and his like influence over Muslims. But when did you really feel connected to the Muslim community?
From a faith basis?
From a faith basis and from a community basis. I think those two are separate, right?
Yeah, totally. I think, I was, if you've spoken to my high school friends, I think they would speak of interesting times, I should say, where faith didn't play much of a role in me. I think there's a friend of mine named Jenghis Seyhan who really elevated my understanding of Islam and helped me find my way back in. I definitely credit, his friendship and his patience and perseverance, really, because he just like didn't want to take no for an answer when I said, yeah, I'll go make salah later. and I think that, he was critical on that. And throughout when I came back to UTM as the executive director at UTMSU, and I saw all you guys, I think that, you know, your khutbahs and Mohammed Hashim's khutbahs and Yasin Ahmed's khutbahs were probably the best khutbahs I actually ever, like in that short period of time when all three of you were on rotation. Like, I don't think I cried as much through khutbahs as I did in that time. And I think that was like, it was like, it really, you know, though that got to me. And that was a moment where I was trying to look for where I belonged. And I think those were major influences. So I think that from there, the journey started. And I don't think there's any ever one moment of anything. I think they're always journeys of awakening and enlightenment. I think that was definitely 2007 is when that shift happened in my mind.
Interesting. Actually, that's a good point, because a lot of people, you know, the sunnah of the Prophet was to have really short khutbahs. So there's always some people who come up and be like, yo, why don't you just make your khutbah like 5 minutes and follow the sunnah, and why are you guys talking so much? And I'm like, listen, most people need to be educated about the religion, and this is the only time they come to the mosque, and, you know, the companions of the Prophet would be at the mosque all the time, so he didn't need to make a longer khutbah, right? I think that's a good, like, your story is a good story of why it's important for us to have that platform and to use it to kind of speak to people.
I just like to say it's gone downhill since.
Yeah,
man. Khutbahs have just been like, like, you know, back in the days, you would want to get there on time, so you would hear the whole thing. Now I calculate, I'm like, I'm going to this mosque, you know, khutbah starts at, you know, 1:00, you know, salah's at 1:30. Do I need to get there?
but let me tell you the difference, because I think it's like the difference between being an amateur and being a professional. Because when you're an amateur and you're on like rotations at different mosques, so for example, like first week of the month I'm at Isna, second week of the month I'm at, you know, Tawheed Mosque, third week of the month I'm at Al-Falah, fourth week of the month I'm at some other mosque. And so basically every month I'm writing one khutbah. And I'm going around giving the same khutbah 4 times at different places.
Khutbah shopping it out.
This is what most people do, right? But then when you're an imam of a single mosque, then you're giving the khutbah in that same mosque every single week. And you have to find a way not to repeat yourself, and you have to find a way to come up with your material, and you have to find a way to be engaging to the same audience over and over. And it's incredibly difficult. Like, I thought I was a good khatib before I became an imam, and then I was like, yo, this is really difficult. This is tough.
Because you ain't got you don't have a stump speech. You're constantly having to rewrite it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then when I try to like do some kind of rotation, like go off to another mosque, at least like recharge myself a little bit and give myself some time, some people will get upset. Some people are like, this is your mosque, you're the imam, you need to be here every single Friday. And I'm just like, why is it bad for people to hear a different khatib every once in a while, right? What's the problem with that?
You know, back in 2004, I was working for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and they put me on this road show where I would go across the country, and I spoke to about 250,000 kids during high school assemblies. And in the beginning, I was just like super nervous because I was like, you know, pretty mediocre at public speaking. But towards the end of it, I had my stump speech down like absolutely perfect. I can walk into like a massive gym of 1,500 people, and I'd be like, I'm gonna make you cry now.
But that's easy when it's like one speech. That's easy.
It's easy. It was so easy. But you know, but that I agree with you. I hear you that, like, you know, if you're doing something on repeat, you can master it. But if you're recreating, and that's actually probably one of the hardest things in like the current world that like I'm working in within the Muslim community, where like every file that I have to handle is so incredibly different, and you have to be so creative on so many different levels.
So for example, just because people are not going to understand what it means to have different files in the Muslim community, but like, for example, you might have a mosque that's coming to you and being like, hey, some news agency is going to write an article about how somebody who showed up at our mosque once
was connected to
terrorism somehow. And please help us message that just because this person showed up once doesn't mean that this entire center is tainted. And then you might have
An 11-year-old girl who gets her hijab cut.
Yeah.
Or you
like
have
that.
a Quebec City massacre and you got to fly out there.
Yeah.
Or if you have, a Peel District School Board for not accommodating religious accommodation properly, and then that's creating a whole next level of like hate.
Yeah.
How do you respond?
Yeah.
It never ends.
So those kinds of files, just for people to be aware of. Yeah, I think that's interesting. And then you're dealing with like different segments of the Muslim community too, right? Like you're dealing with like the people who are more very conservative, and then you're dealing with people who are like very liberal.
Yeah.
And sometimes their interests align, sometimes they don't. And how do you like manage through that?
Yeah, I don't throw anybody under the bus. If you, I mean, there's people who will go after Salafis or whoever,
Right.
and say, well, those conservatives or those folks are not the right ones.
Right.
I have zero tolerance for any of that. I'm like, if you're not promoting violence or hate, come on board. And I think people will find that to be subjective because some people will be like, I disagree with that person's opinion or that school's opinion,
Right.
and therefore I feel like they're hating on me for whatever reason. But, so I think that bar is always a fluctuating one. But, I if I honestly believe, like Al-Huda, for example, right? When Al-Huda was connected, when the San Bernardino shootings were happening, just happened, and it was discovered that one of the women that was involved with that had been to an Al-Huda school in Pakistan, and then they connected that to the Al-Huda school here in Mississauga, and then CBC ran a story saying 4 women from the school here in Mississauga were somehow connected to ISIS. And to be honest, it was such irresponsible reporting. They had previously reported that, I think 1 or 2 of the 4 people that they were referring to were radicalized somewhere else. They reported that themselves, yet still threw shade at Al-Huda. Yeah. And at the time, I had no idea about any of that. Like when I first took the file, which was an hour and a half after the story broke. Yeah. Nobody really knew all that avalanche was going to come at you, but I knew people at Al-Huda. I knew that they weren't promoting violence. I know that they weren't promoting terrorism or any of that stuff. So do they deserve somebody to come in and say, here, let's try to figure out how to walk through this probably the worst day of your life? So that's what I do. I show up on people's worst days of their life.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting conversation too, because there's people who are going to be like, well, because Al-Huda practices a stricter version of Islam, therefore, and so like in their minds, they've made that pure connection between a stricter version of Islam and terrorism.
Yeah. Or a pathway to terrorism.
And I know like there's been that, they used to have that theory in counter extremism research about like the conveyor belt. So you go through this conveyor belt of like, Salafi Islam and then hardcore Salafi Islam, and then next thing you do, become a terrorist. But then when they've done like more detailed research, they've shown that actually that doesn't hold up, and people's pathways to radicalization are always different, person to person.
Totally.
And surprise, and something that I've recognized myself, like there's some people who like become radicalized, they know nothing about, like they barely even know the word Salafi. They know nothing about Islam to begin with. But somehow they got radicalized because like certain incidents in their lives or whatever. But I think that's like an issue of almost like internalizing Islamophobia to an extent.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've bought into that mindset of, after 9/11, all of us kind of were on edge where if you got called a terrorist, that was basically the end of you, right? People would just want to shun you and stay away from you. And that was real, right? Like people felt that. And I think that, yeah, and that label became a community blacklist, right? And it's been weaponized.
The other thing that you mentioned is about throwing people under the bus. And I know you can't talk about it in too much detail, but that story about the, what was she, like 11-year-old girl who the hijab was cut and she went to her school and then they called the police and it became national news. And then it came out later on that it didn't exactly happen, at least the way they reported it. I saw this instinct in our community. It was just like,
Blame the kid.
The kid is making us look bad. Throw her under the bus.
Yeah,
Blame
yeah,
her.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
the way that we're going to look better out of this. And I saw it from like a lot of uncles and aunties on Facebook, just like totally jumping on that. I saw it even from some of our institutions, like putting out like statements and positions of like, it's her fault. It's not our fault. It's her fault. Right. Like, and it's like, you guys forgot she's 11 years old. She's 11 years old. Why are you guys trying to throw her under the bus?
And I don't
like
think it's like she made assumptions of what had happened. And I don't want to get into the whole thing, but the start of that conversation, the start of that date, I don't know what to say. But when she was leaving her lobby, there was a young man that met the description that she gave to police, who brushed her and walked right past her. And she got startled, and she turned around and she felt her hijab, and it was cut. She didn't know at the time that it wasn't cut by him, but she thought that it was because she got startled at that moment. So in her mind, she's like, that guy cut my hijab.
Wow.
And then from there, and if an 11-year-old feels that, and like, you have to understand, this 11-year-old has never been in trouble, straight A student, never gotten never done like anything that's of any suspicion, to school, to her parents. It's like a model kid that just did the right thing all the time. So when she got startled that way, and she, in her mind as an 11-year-old kid, she's like, I think that guy cut my hijab. I think that guy cut my hijab. And then that spiraled into one thing after the next, after the next, and the next. And you have to understand, like, from that moment to 4 hours later, like 4 hours in the middle of that like moment, from that 4 hours is from the moment that happened to the moment she gets to school, where a principal's informed, parents are informed, police are informed, police interview, parents come to the school, parents meet with the whole family comes to the school, media shows up at the school, press conference happens. It's 4 hours. Wow. It's like 4.5 hours, right? So the speed by which that thing went out of control is really, this is
insane.
It's insane. Yeah. Like, and I don't think anybody was doing anything maliciously. Like nobody had malicious intent in this. Every single person, and I can throw everybody under the bus for how badly managed this whole situation was. But I honestly think that if I was in the same room at the same time with all that stuff, I don't know if I would have played it any different from how it went down. Because everybody believed, even the girl herself believed that is what happened.
Right.
Anyways.
That's crazy. So from the perspective of like the school is just...
We're not going into that.
Right. Can't go into too much detail.
No.
But what's interesting is that like she jumps to the conclusion that her hijab got cut.
Yeah. Because there was a cut in her hijab.
Because there's a cut in her hijab. So she's got this cut in her hijab. Obviously her mind is going to go there because this is the world she's living in.
No, I don't know about that, man.
Come on.
I don't know. I think she reacted to a cut in her hijab, man. I'm not gonna. There's no way. Like when I spoke to her, I asked that question, right? And without getting into too much, I don't like. It's hard to say, like if that was a factor or not. Like, were there systemic issues was there systemic Islamophobia that has ingrained into her that made her think that that was an Islamophobic act, and therefore she attributed that to that. I don't know if that has any factual basis or not. All I know is
I don't know how you ignore that. I mean, I have a 7-year-old daughter.
yeah,
She asked me, why do people hate Muslims?
yeah.
Like, she's 11 years old. You know, the thing is, like,
I think she reacted. She turned around. She felt
Yeah.
a cut in her hijab, and she's like, "I think that guy did it."
yeah, because that's where her mind's going to go right away. You know?
Or because she got startled at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, the reaction of the police maybe overreacting, the school maybe overreacting, because they know what the world we're living in is, right?
Totally. I think
Yeah.
all of them reacted to that.
Yeah.
Every single other person reacted to that.
Yeah.
I don't think the kid reacted. I think the kid was honestly just like reacting like any other 11-year-old kid would do in that situation where she just like got startled. She's like, okay, I think that guy did it. I think I think that guy did it. Yeah. And then, there's a lead up to all this stuff. And then there's other things that made her think that, when she got further down the street, she turned around, she saw the same guy. She's like, oh my God, this guy's following us. That's Buddha, right? So like those things sink deep into kids' like mindsets. And yeah, anyways.
That's crazy. I mean, the way,
I can't get into details.
can't go into details, but the way that people understood
Yeah.
that incident
They threw her under the bus.
versus what actually happened.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. There's such a huge shift.
And we just kept saying, like, imagine it's your daughter.
Yeah.
Imagine it's your kid. Like,
One day
what would
when
we-
when I'm allowed, I'll talk about it more in full detail.
more details. Although I gave a lot of details here, I'm not gonna lie. But no, I mean, because that's something that I think the main message we have to. I think there's a few lessons we have to take out of it. Is number one, we have to not be as reactive, even though the circumstances, the times that we're living in are so, difficult for Muslims. We have to hold ourselves sometimes from rushing to judgment. And I say that to myself too, because sometimes I rush to judgment.
No, I think that's a question where you're basically saying that the mom shouldn't have done the press conference. Because if you break down the minute by minute of this thing,
I can't blame the parents because they probably showed up at school, and then it's like, here's a
mom
camera on your
thought
face,
she was doing the right thing. Mom
Yeah.
thought she's like, honestly, there's a predator out there that is like cutting kids' hijabs.
Yeah.
I need to speak out against that, and I want to make sure everybody knows what's happening and that there are people who are affected by it, and I want my voice to be. I want to help find this person.
We just hope that there's like a sober second thought somewhere in there.
The speed by which it happened.
Yeah.
It was just this every junction of that day.
But for within 4 hours that you have, basically all of the media in this country was at that school.
Yeah.
Like what, 30 trucks outside the school or something like that?
I don't know. Yeah,
Something crazy like that. I mean, you saw the press conference, how many people were there. I don't know. I mean, does the media have a responsibility to maybe like wait? But then if it really was, her hijab really was cut,
They did the right thing.
then you'd be like, hey, why isn't the media covering this, right?
No, I think the TDSB did the right thing. I think the police did the right thing. I think the parents did the right thing.
Yeah.
Because the mom, straight up asked me, she's like, did I do the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
And after speaking to, a variety of sources on this thing, if I was in the room at the time the press conference was happening and the mom was asked to do the press conference, and I fully believed, like every single other person in that room, that like it all went down the way it did, I don't know if I would have stopped her.
Yeah. If you actually think this happened, and
Everybody did.
everyone does,
Everybody
and the
thought
girl
it
does
happened.
not have, everyone knows
Even the
her
girl
to be
thought it
like
happened, right?
perfect, and she thinks it happened, and the police who interview her think it happened, and
Everybody.
it's hard to.
The police.
It's easy to second guess them, but it's hard to, if you were in that situation, not to do it.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the breakdown of all that stuff, but everybody thought it to be true.
But then it just goes to show you, don't throw people under the bus because you don't know what's like, don't make these assumptions.
Yeah.
Some people were like writing like, people need to teach their kids not to lie. Like, I was like, how do you know anything about what happened, right?
Yeah.
And then people were jumping to like conclusions. Oh, she cut her hijab because she didn't want to wear a hijab.
I asked her that, and she's like, "No, what are you talking about?" It's like
she's 11 years old. If she doesn't want to wear a hijab, she'll take it off. Like,
this is a beautiful family that honestly is like, their souls are incredibly kind and giving, and they're thoughtful, and they're caring, and the way they've been conveyed out there is it's yeah.
One of the worst things I kept hearing was that, they're like, they need to give Canadians an apology as if they themselves are not Canadian. You know what I mean? Like there was this immediate, like, that was the right wing was like pushing that narrative, and it really upset me. I was like, because you're just saying
you're othering,
just otherizing them and saying that they're just not Canadian.
Yeah, Mom wears a niqab, so obviously she's not Canadian, right?
Yeah.
Mom's perfect English.
I know. And you think about the human
Mom
cost.
is awesome. Mom is hilarious.
And you think about the human cost for that family, like,
yeah.
And for what? For something that's like not in their control at all.
I've checked in on them a number of times afterwards.
Oh.
Yeah, and the school board is really stepping up and giving them lots of support, and
that's good.
They've gotten lots of support from their community as well, and it's something that I'm not done with the story yet.
I shouldn't be. I mean,
one day I really need to just make sure that people understand what actually happened when I have the more liberty to talk about it.
She's gonna have to change her name though. That was one of the things I was thinking about. I was like, that girl's gonna grow up one day. She's gonna need to get a job, and people are gonna Google her name, and it's not gonna be pretty. She needs to change her name. It's the world we live in right now.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Maybe.
Yeah. Or Canada needs to pass one of those laws. Those laws they have in some European states where like, you have a right to be forgotten. So, yeah, you could send an email to Google and be like,
"Forget me.
I want all this stuff. I want to be forgotten. I want everything taken away," and they have to do it.
I'd like that.
Yeah.
Just go dark once and for all.
Everybody could turn into Batman and just disappear.
Nobody knows.
Honestly, though, think about like for us, we grew up, our formative years, like 12, 13, 14, 15, there's barely any social media. There wasn't any social media.
Yeah.
Maybe those message boards.
MSN.
Yeah, but that's not social media. Those chats
if you're
disappeared.
really old, you'll remember ICQ.
I do remember ICQ. What was the thing? Be like ASL? What was that? I was like,
now you're dating yourself, man. Let's just stop.
No, but I was young and I homeschooled, so all I'd do is like go on like chat
not
rooms
school.
And stuff, yeah, and then have like conversations with like 50-year-old people about Islam. I was like,
how did that work out? and you were telling me about my time in high school and how shady that was.
Well, I was doing dawah. I was like 14 years old, nerd, and doing dawah online. That was what I was doing. And then PayPal, or not PayPal. What's it called? Paltalk.
Paltalk.
You ever get into Paltalk?
No. Nah.
That was like, do you know Yassine? Paltalk? No, you guys never got into it? That was, it was like a program where it was a chat room, but voice chat. Predates Skype. And they'd have all these groups and people that give like Islamic lectures and stuff, and sometimes like interfaith debates and all that kind of stuff would happen there. So it was an interesting platform.
You were hustling early.
Yeah, honestly, man. I don't know.
And then I just cut myself off at some point, which was not smart.
Yeah,
And
I
then now
worked
I'm
retail
like,
instead.
Now I'm like, what's Instagram?
Some of us had to, go work at Harvey's, and other people over here had to go sit on MSN Messenger all day, all long, making friends with 50-year-old men while they're 14 years old.
I would say I made friends with them. I just debated them about religion. Because the thing is, they would think I was like old, right? They would think I was like a 30-year-old guy arguing with them about Islam. And I was like, in reality, I'm 14 years old arguing with you.
Sounds like a very internet moment.
These were the wild, wild west days of the internet. Like, we think today's bad. Before it was like even worse. We were lucky that nothing got saved. There was no like Twitter feed. There's no Facebook feed. Nothing lasted forever. But these kids today, man.
If you're listening to this, I don't know this man. Whatever you've heard earlier did not exist.
But these kids today, man, anything they write on their Twitter, on their Facebook,
forever.
it's forever.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah. One of the things I like about Facebook Memories is it reminds me of the stuff I used to write in the past. I'll be like, okay, I'm not stupid anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard to survive. I think, if you are young and you're thinking about, running in political office, and you want to do, solidarity work for Palestine, or you want to talk about even Islamophobia to certain degrees, or the tone by which you use things it can be very, very, very touchy.
Yeah.
And the reality is that ideas change as times change, right? So what is politically soluble today will not be 20 years from now, or was not 10 years ago. So things will always fluctuate up and down. So though you might be responding to a moment in time at this place, right. Like how many imams over here get attacked for saying homophobic stuff from 40 years ago? Yeah.
Back then they were saying what everyone else is saying.
Yeah.
But they just clip those videos and they bring them out today and they look like Neanderthals, right?
Totally.
Yeah. There's a girl too in Calgary. I think last election she was going to run. Or she was running for something.
Yeah, she was a liberal.
Yeah. And then they like went through her Twitter feed and they found some stuff that she wrote when she was like 15.
Yeah.
And then they were just like, she had to quit and all that.
Man, I wish I had like a staff of 50 people that could comb through people's histories. I would just sit there and make sure that like I could find every Islamophobic thing. I'd write a letter to their employer, write a letter to their, to their gym. I'd write a letter to, their aunt and their uncles. I'd be like, hey, look, and then boom, when I don't get responses, I would, like write another letter to their MPs and their MPPs. Then I write another letter to the media to say, hey, look, we've tried out so many times to figure out who this bigot is, and now, they ain't responding. You want to do some coverage on it? Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's politically annihilate this person.
That's what they do to the Muslim community.
I know.
That's what they constantly do.
Yes, half the time I'm dealing with those things. Brother Mohammed Hashim, I'm getting this letter. What do I do? I say, brother, there's a shredder right there. Use it right there, and then let me make some calls for you.
How do we get smarter about the way we talk, though? How do we teach the community to get smarter about the way that we talk and we think through problems, even? Because I don't know, this community is a community of just like pure emotions.
Man, we just showed up here, bro. I'm far more lenient than you are.
Yeah, I think so.
I think so. I honestly, we just I'm almost 40 years old now. Do you remember that? I put a Facebook post a little while ago. And I said, does anybody know any 55-year-old Muslims that were born in Canada? And I got like 80 comments on that thing. And there's like, oh, I know some people from Edmonton. Oh, I know some people from London. I know some converts. Yeah. And that was about it. That was it. Right? So Canadian-born Muslims are just coming, I'm probably in the elder generation of that, right? So we just showed up here. Like, we don't even have any 55-year-olds that own law firms that are like opening up doors for a bunch of lawyers or accounting firms, or we've got a few university presidents and whatnot recently. But as we start establishing our foothold here in Canada, people all all that will change over the next 15 to 20 years, inshallah. Everything's going to change in the next 15 to 20 years. Because, we just showed up. We're like, all right, we got to find our own. Let's build some mosques so we can pray together. And we're still stuck in the mosque building mode, which is perpetual and never ending, much to my annoyances. And as we start, we're gonna just build the mosque for a little while. Then we're gonna say, we need to look at social services. Let's build some food banks. And then they're gonna be like, oh, we need some women's shelters because that's an issue. That's a major issue. Then it's gonna be like, okay, we need some rec centers. Then it's gonna be like, hey, we need some medical services for some of our young folks. Okay, let's figure
Senior
out
homes.
the seniors' homes. And then after all that stuff is when you're gonna want to have advocacy. Because at that point, you're actually established as beneficial to Canada. Like, we just got out of the immigration office, right? Like, straight up, like, this is where we're at. Forget about foreign affairs. We just got out of the immigration office. And maybe I'm just mischaracterizing it. And I think that there's a whole spectrum of where the community is at. And I don't want to negate the efforts of people who are working in deep advocacy or on social services and saying that they're out of touch or in touch in time. But I think because there's all that exists for sure, but the thickness of our community is still in that mindset of just, we're here, we just showed up, we're struggling, and we're trying to get by.
But I think 9/11 and the buildup of Islamophobia after 9/11 doesn't give us that luxury. Like, you don't have the luxury of just waiting until we're so firmly established in the country before we start telling our narrative and
so
taking control of
9/11
our story. We don't have that luxury.
Yeah, well, we don't have the capacity either. We don't have the capacity to combat it. How many political staffers are there that are Muslim? How far senior are they? How many journalists are Muslim? How many writers and columnists are Muslim? How many public relation firms? I can think of examples for all those things, and there are great examples of great people doing all those different things. But the critical mass does not exist,
Right.
and that critical mass is slowly getting there. But that's a product of time. You can't really accelerate that. You can accelerate that in certain opportunities. Like, that's why we did this Muslim Youth Fellowship, so that we can accelerate people's entry into civic society in a very intentional and meaningful way, so that they can take their understanding of how Canadian society actually operates, actually operates. How does power translate into action, and how does power move in relationship to communities, and teaching them these lessons and allows them to see, instead of themselves getting to become a minister, having them to actually imagine themselves as prime ministers. And yeah, it's generational, man. It's coming. And I actually think Islamophobia, to be honest, is a moment in time. I actually see past it. I don't. Yeah, I see past it. I see, because, the benefit of working for the labor movement is that we have very long memories. I work for an organization that is 147 years old.
Wow.
We just formed a couple of years after Confederation, right? After the country was happening. All right, let's create a labor council. All right, cool. So our memories are very old, where we know that in the early 50s, it was the Italians that were getting it. In the 60s and 70s, in the 60s, the Jews have been getting it forever. And the South Asians were getting it in the 70s and 80s. And then the Black community has also been getting it forever. And all those different things have been, they go up and they go down. They go up and they go down. And I honestly believe that with Islamophobia, it'll go down.
So I've heard those arguments before, and
Can I tell you why?
Go ahead.
One night I was kind of bored. So after the 11-year-old story came out, I went onto Twitter and I found every single condemnation of that act by every single politician.
Wow.
And I wrote them all down on an Excel file.
Wow.
And then I categorized them by time, political part, and a political affiliation. And I looked at them and I'm like, like this is how quickly the liberals reacted. This is how quickly the New Democrats reacted. This is how quickly the conservatives reacted.
To the initial story, or
to the initial story? Okay. Because the initial, like a metric that one can understand from the reaction to the initial story, because the gravity, the egregiousness of what had happened was so visceral and so wrong that the reaction was also so quick and in response, right? And that almost was a translation of how sensitive people were to, or politicians were to, Islamophobia. Or at least I thought so. Maybe I'm wrong.
You saw that in the data? Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. So I sat there and it was like hundreds of people. This is what I do in my neurotic, like sleepless nights where I can't actually sleep, right? And what it showed me was that like the level of sensitivity to how people reacted so quickly to that, A, because it was a kid, B, because it was clearly, a hate crime. The cops declared it a hate crime.
Right.
And just and so it was actually, so what that tells me is that when I look at the Paris attacks and what the response was, because there was a huge amount of like backlash here. Right. We saw Muslim women getting attacked horribly across Toronto and across Ontario and Canada. And the political reaction to that versus the political reaction to this, it's like night and day. I didn't sit there at that time and look at tweets minute by minute, but this one I had some more time, so I wanted to.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I've heard those arguments about like, and I know personally an Italian guy who converted to Islam, and he was telling me like when he was 16, he got beat up by the police in the middle of the street, and like that was like normal life for them and stuff like that. This is way back when, but I feel like. I mean, look at how you have all these
because your hand is still on the fire.
No. Here's my point. You have these like you've always had these like crazy extreme groups out here in Canada, like these far right, white nationalist groups, and there's so many different white nationalist groups, and they all hate each other. By the way,
they're not going anywhere.
And you have like groups like the JDL, and you have groups like far right Hindu nationalist groups. They've always existed in this country, right, for a long time. They all unite now because they hate Islam. Yeah, and you never had that type of like synergy of hate in the past. Like there was a lot of hatred, maybe with the exception of Black people and Indigenous
Conservative
people.
Party of Canada. So like politicians matter. The way they frame arguments matters. The Conservative Party, in my opinion, at this point still refers to Muslims as suspicious, other, and untrustworthy, and potentially, maybe not so dangerous, but like worthy of some suspicion, right? I think what that does is that allows all those bigots, it gives them political cover to use Islamophobia as an organizing tool. And because like the Conservative Party creates the environment for them to have that narrative be public and yet not hateful, and not seen as hateful because they're basically validating it,
right?
Then what that does is that it creates an umbrella for all those haters and bigots to really organize in public, which is where they can say their messages about Islam or Muslims, or, like Islam is this, or Muslims are that, or Islamophobia doesn't exist, or all of the way they throw shade at, the Muslim community. It's because but the moment the Conservative Party turns against Islamophobia, names Islamophobia, says it's wrong, all those other, that umbrella will evaporate, and that the bigots will sound like bigots and not what people that have mildly political opinion, like that have political opinions that could be valid. And the moment that happens is when you see all the bigots go underground.
So in the environment that we're in, this political environment in which both on the left and the right, everybody wants to push their narrative through the most extreme version because that's what gets people's passions going.
Yeah,
if you try to push like a centrist vision, people are just like, meh, I don't care.
Yeah,
but if you push like a hard left or a hard right, understanding, that's when you get people donating money, showing up to volunteer, posting like crazy on social media. That's where you get your enthusiasm from. Doesn't that put us in this situation that like, where is it going to end?
Yeah. Demographics are not on the side of bigotry on this file.
Because young people are just not.
Young people, but also, there's enough Muslims in Canada that most Canadian Muslims know other Canadians, and people know each other.
Yeah.
So it's only a matter of time when the Muslim being the other becomes. So there's demographics, and the portion that I'm not going to talk about today is how Muslims politically organize. Right. Because like that there, the two factors, it's like power through people,
right,
and power through organization. And when the two come to a point of critical weight, all that is manageable.
It's a really long-term vision.
Nah, man. I'd say 15 years max.
15 years?
Yeah, just watching.
I hope so. I mean, it wouldn't be the
That's
first
a really cocky
time.
thing to say.
It is, but
delete it.
It wouldn't be the first time in which you've given me an idea and I'm a bit like, Mohammed, you're crazy. That's never going to work.
Yeah.
But I don't have any other idea, so I'll accept your...
And how many times have my ideas worked?
And it's worked a fair bit, I have to admit.
Tell me one that didn't work.
I can't think
That's
of one.
right. Sorry.
Although I'm sure there are some, because I think part of your strategic approach is like, try 100 different things and eventually one of them is going to work out.
Yep. Let's figure it out again and again and again and again and again and again.
Yeah. But I do think we have to figure out a way to teach our community to be more nuanced because, I mean, you're right. Like there's still like probably the majority of our donation money still goes overseas where people are like, oh, people back home because they still see like
home,
Pakistan, Egypt stuff being home and this being like temporary home. And they're like, oh, those people need it more. So I'm just going to send my money there.
What's our number one charity? Islamic Relief.
Islamic Relief, yeah.
Right? What do they fundraise on? I'd say 80%, 90% of it goes to foreign aid.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, you call it back home.
Quote unquote, back home.
And I said foreign aid.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm just...
yeah.
That's how they see it, right?
Yeah.
And they're not the only ones. Human Concern International, IDRF,
yeah,
all the
Islamic
major...
Relief,
Islamic Relief is eating the pie.
No, like they probably...
Not all of it.
Yeah, they probably raise more than all of them combined.
Yeah. But I'm saying like, even if they're taking the overwhelming majority of people's donations, number 2 and number 3 and number 4 and number 5 on the list are all sending money to foreign countries.
Yeah, because like I mean, we still have family there. We still hear news from there.
Yeah,
we still see poverty there, extreme poverty, but yeah, how many? And those things are all real. And there's a duty for Muslims to support other Muslims going through hardship.
For sure. So
that inevitably will always be there.
But then the hardship is that, like you said, we need to go through the process of, going beyond building mosques, starting to build community centers, starting to build women's shelters, starting to build food banks, starting to build all these social services. How are you going to do that if people are still in that like back home mentality and send things back home? And then the other issue is that when they're in that back home mentality is that they take back home rhetoric, right?
They come with back home
rhetoric. They come with back home rhetoric and they still like, they'll still take it from back home and then they'll try to like basically
Yeah, and that's why we have moms saying stupid things
Yes.
on YouTube, and
Yes.
then like they getting called out and
Yes.
eventually getting fired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Alhamdulillah.
so what are the tangible ways to get people to start thinking differently? It's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough one because I think and I've significantly seen an increase in the nuance in khutbahs out of fear of getting caught.
Which is not ideal either.
Yeah, no, it's not because like all of a sudden folks got enlightened.
Yeah.
It's like I don't want to get caught saying something stupid. So if I'm gonna go down to
But part of the issue is like they don't even know
yeah.
what something stupid is.
Yeah, they know the hot buttons.
They know the hot topics. So
Yeah.
They just try to like avoid the hot topics, but they don't even know like if you're like what's politically correct and not incorrect. They don't actually know.
Yeah.
Right. Because for them, some things seem like, oh, this is just completely obvious, and then like, oh, turns out actually it's really controversial.
Yeah.
Right. Like they don't have that concept. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm asking this question.
It's a matter of
question I'm
time
asking
and distance,
myself.
man.
Yeah.
It's a matter of time and distance. You gotta.
Then you also worry about going to like the opposite extreme where
that's
it's
the
like,
thing we really got to worry about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where we're just gonna like regurgitate whatever popular culture is saying mindlessly because we don't want to get in trouble and offend people.
Yeah, this is what I'm really
We're not
afraid
actually
of.
telling our story and telling our perspective.
I'm really like the reason why I will work with the most like conservative of Muslims is because, to be quite frank, like they're the ones holding on to Islam. They are like, I mean, like they're the ones that are teaching their kids and they're bringing them to the mosque and they're making it a regular part of their life and their existence. And when you live in the West, I bet you every person that ever came here thought, man, if I come here, are my kids going to grow up Muslim? Are my grandkids going to grow up Muslim? I'm sure everybody who came here thought that, right?
Yeah.
Because like maybe they had delusions that they will be, right?
Yeah.
But,
Actually, when you talked about like finding Muslims who've been over 55 years old born in Canada. So obviously Edmonton is the first place Muslims settled. I was in Edmonton once. I think I was going horseback riding, and then the girl there.
did you wear a Mountie uniform?
No, I did not do that. But there was a guy there. There's a guy there, and he was talking to my sister, and he was like, he saw them wearing hijab, obviously, and he's like, oh yeah, he's like, my great grandmother used to wear that.
Wow.
I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, they used to be Muslim. Or like we used to, like my family was Muslim, and so it was just like kind of faded.
Yeah.
Generation by generation.
This is what I tell you, man. Like you need to be like, as much as there is going to be pressure for imams to assimilate and learn and understand nuance better, you can't give up the religion.
Yeah.
Just can't. And like, if you do so, you're screwing all the following generations.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, like there's huge pressure not to assimilate, not like the U.S. where you like, forget your forget your Muslimness, but like there's huge pressure. You're going to high school, your friends are dating.
Yeah.
Like you look like the odd one that's not, right?
Right.
Like, or you're in university and your friends are going to a pub and you're like, do I go? Do I not go? There's like, you live in a world that, like TV. It's like, it has violence and it has like, sexuality that's like everywhere.
Yeah.
So like the pressure of this environment is huge.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest worry we have to worry about. I'm more worried about that than Islamophobia.
Interesting. No, it's really powerful. I mean, I remember I met, I think you might have been with me. I met with a rabbi here in Toronto, and he said to me, he said, don't do what happened to us. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, the pressures of modernity made us basically give up our scripture to fit in, basically. And he's like, don't do what we did. Like, don't go that hard to the extreme.
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah, which is tough. Right?
Tough.
But he's right.
Totally.
And the issue is that once we lose the basic tenets of the faith, like
Or compromise.
or have compromised it, or like
Yeah.
basically we decide, hey, the Quran, the Sunnah, the scripture that we have, we can just like do away with the things that we find inconvenient or politically difficult to deal with. We're just going to throw it away or reinterpret it in a way that's like completely like fantasy. You know, there's no like, it's not a real interpretation. You're just trying to like not deal with what it's saying. That what ends up happening is what's connecting us. What connects me to you?
Yeah.
You're from Pakistan originally. I'm from Egypt originally. You know,
Yeah.
what gives us a shared language? It's our scripture.
What
right?
you just said there can be interpreted by somebody as saying, "Nah, man, we got to be as homophobic as we have been."
No,
right?
no, not at all. I do think we have to understand. We have to figure out how to assimilate in the culture and integrate in the culture in a way that does not desecrate the sanctity of our shared scripture.
Yeah. While still maintaining the human rights and dignity of every single person
Yes.
that lives on this land.
Yeah.
We're going to have to stop over here. Mohammed and I are both exhausted, so we're going to take a pin in this and continue this conversation on another day. I think we're just scratching the surface of a really important conversation about the clash between religious communities and modernity and how exactly we should be navigating these tricky waters. Actually, the whole reason I asked Mohammed to come here today was that we were going to talk about the unionization of Islamic institutions. We never even got to that topic. So he's definitely going to be back, and we're definitely going to continue where we left off today. I hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks.